Thank you, worship team. Indy, I'll put you on the spot. How's the friend, what's it called?
Fundraiser?
Friendraiser.
Great.
That's what I heard. What's going on?
Well, this week we're doing a relay race, and as far as competition, we've got 5 teams. We're kind of pitting them against each other, and the goal of Fundraiser is to encourage them to bring friends. There is a point system, there is a big prize, Double J Water Park. So, you know, we do try to incentivize them, and then we do team games so that they can earn points that way. But it's really cool to see a lot of kids who have never heard the gospel are coming, and it's just an incredibly encouraging month. And we've always done it, and we've always just had a great time with it. So it's going really well.
How can we support you? What do we need to do?
I would say just pray for the new kids that are coming in, that they would be open to hearing the gospel. And I think some of the kids that are currently in our youth group are getting questions from these kids. And so I would say just encouragement for our current kids just to be able to share the gospel and to confidently be able to answer their questions. And if they don't know the questions, just to be able to come to one of us. It's been cool to see that too.
Thank you. Kind of put you on the spot. Great. So wonderful. My title this morning to my message is, Are You an Unlikely? Now, Grammarly, which I don't use often, didn't like that statement. I guess it's not proper. But I tried many other ways of saying it, and I couldn't get it. And maybe it's not real clear, but it's like, are you an unlikely? Because as I walk through the scriptures, and we started in Genesis and we're up to Judges, it seems like God is taking very unlikely people all the time and using them. Like, man, I didn't see that one coming. I'd have never thought He'd have chosen them, or it would be that guy or that gal as we go through and we see these judges. Are you an unlikely for what God wants to do? Pat Shesbo was an unlikely. Pat is an associate pastor in British Columbia, Canada, and one time when Pat was spending time with Jesus, he was pondering the cross, and he kept asking the Lord, why? Why, Lord? Why, Jesus, would you, a perfect, sinless being, make a way for me, a sinner, to be reconciled? He kept asking that big, powerful question of why that we spoke about. We did that last week. Our challenge was for the next 30 days, whenever the why question comes in your heart, and we're all faced with that because life is life, and we live in a fallen world, and there's things that don't seem to quite make sense, and we go to God and say, why, God? We want to know. We're curious people. We love to be in the know. The hardest place to be is in between that gap of not knowing and doing. That's a terrible place to be. We don't deal well with the unknown. So he's asking, why, God? Why, Jesus, would you do such a thing for me, such a terrible sinner? Well, the last 30 days we said, how about let's try when that comes across our hearts and our mind and we want to ask God why. You say, no. What, Lord? What would you like me to do next? Not why, because I probably won't understand it anyhow. I won't get it. Because we saw that that's how God answered Gideon last week. When Gideon is there trying to press out his wheat in that hiding place where normally you would do it up on a highest point with the wind blowing, and he's hiding because the Midianites would come and they would take in all their riches and all their harvest, and so they were living in such fear, and God comes and says, Gideon, go. And Gideon says, why, Lord? Why? Where are you? If you're such a great God, why have all these terrible things happened to us? And I loved it because God answered. And his answer was not an explanation of why he was doing what he was doing, but he answered with a what? Go, he said. In fact, the angel, the theophany said, go. I wrote it down. You valiant warrior, you. Well, if you remember anything about Gideon, he was anything but a valiant warrior. We're going to see a valiant warrior this week, supposedly, but Gideon was no valiant warrior. He questioned God all the time. He had to put out fleeces, and he was just doubt. Gideon says, we're living in caves, we're afraid, we're starving. God says, here's what I want you to do, oh valiant warrior, go. Gideon was an unlikely. Are you an unlikely? Jesus likes using people to complete his plans. It's a wonderful thing. He seems to like to take people that are over here doing their own thing and pick them up and place them over here to meet this person at a certain time and have those two connect and then carry out what he wants to do. He likes using people. Being an unlikely is always about Jesus. It's never about us. As I reflected on Grace Community Church, I was very encouraged when I thought about this, because I see a lot of unlikelies in here. Not because I know so much about you and about your past, but that how God has taken you, individuals, and placed you for caring for people. I see action and supporting people, putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak. Humbly, quietly, for Jesus. There's a lot that goes on in this group that many of us aren't aware of. And that's very encouraging to me as I learn more and more. Thank you for that. Well, this morning, as we continue in Judges, we're going to just graze over chapter 9 because I want to get to our focus. And our focus is on this unlikely deliverer, Jephthah, the 9th judge. And Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 10:11 that the Old Testament is an example for us as instruction. And I try to always remember that and bring that into real life in today's application. I operate on the 3 C's. I look at the content, I look at the scripture, and then I look at the context. And what context and what setting is that in? And then I try to look at the concept. Well, what does that mean for us today? Because all of it is transparent and transpositional, where it will come into effect and we can apply it and use it. And Paul encourages that and tells us that yeah, all this is so that we can take it and we can have lessons and that we can learn from it. And so the Old Testament that we're studying is a part of that. And Jephthah gives us 5 lessons that are worth looking at this morning and taking to heart. And not that we would apply all of them, but they at some point would ring in our ears as to how we should live, noting that this is important. We wrapped up with Judges 8:32, and it says, and Gideon, the son of Joash, died at a ripe old age and was buried. Gideon is gone. And we've learned that when a judge dies, that it can be tough for the people because they resort back to the Baals for some reason. It's a hard pattern. It's a cycle that when the leader is gone, the people fall. When the shepherd is hurt, the sheep scatter. I've seen it. Well, God is giving the sons of Israel the promised land to be their church. He says, here's your promised land, here's the church, here's where you're going to go out from, here's where you're going to testify about me, here's where you're going to witness about me, and a testimony to the world of who he is, and he had chose Canaan as the promised land. And I think that God gives us this church. We're not about bricks and mortar, but it's a place to gather, and it's a place to be a testimony that we can go out from into the world to tell who God is. So this building is important in its own way, that it allows us to be able to gather and to encourage each other and support each other when people are hurting and are in need, and then we can go out. And it's very important. The people keep falling through a cycle of blessing and sin. God backs off his hedge of protection. After they're living years in idolatry, they cry out to God, and then he hears their cry and he sends a judge. The one word that probably best describes the book of Judges is mercy, God's mercy. This cycle and God's continued mercy in some way represents us all. It's not uncommon to us. We should be able to relate to that as we fall. I say, you're either up or you're getting up. I don't like you to be beaten down, right? We're either up or getting up. We might get knocked down, but we're getting back up, whatever that looks like. So I encourage you to bring your Bibles, even though that we kind of flow through it pretty fast. We're not doing a verse by verse because that takes some time. And some dear friends are here that we used to do that with a little bit with Stephen Armstrong. But man, you can spend some time going that. And we're not doing that. We're doing it a little bit bigger picture so that we can move along. But I encourage you to bring your Bible so you get comfortable just flipping through it, so you can find your place and see where it's at, and you can pick up on some of the big points. So as we fly over chapter 9, we read of Gideon's, well, I would call him the bad son, the one who was he was an out-of-towner. He wasn't part of the brothers and whatnot, and he came back in, and his name was Abimelech, which he wasn't even called a judge, by the way. That's important to know. And he's probably one of the good reasons that there is question of Gideon's success as a leader and as a father. He didn't shine so well in all that. So if you study that, you'll get a little better picture. But then we move on to chapter 10. And it talks about after Abimelech dies. Well, what happens? The people get in trouble. But basically, in 9 and 10, 9 is a pretty good-sized chapter, but as you flow into 10, you'll see in the beginning all the other judges, that a few of the judges that God gives us, and then we read how each judge dies, and that the sons of Israel get worse and worse and worse into their idolatry and foreign gods. It's really important. It just kind of compounds. They let loose more and more and more and more. The first, how to explain that? The first act of something's the easiest sometimes. The second time around, it's not as painful. I don't know why that is. And they just kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And we read of that. Judges 10, 6 through 7. And we'll see if we can get these. Then the sons of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. They served the Baals and the Ashtaroth, and that's what we've been seeing up to this point. That's the two areas that they served. But now they moved. They're also serving the gods of Aram, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the sons of Ammon, the gods of the Philistines. Thus they forsook the Lord and did evil, did not serve him. They've stepped it up a little bit. They've loosened up the reins. They're not only serving just the Baals and the Ashtaroths, they're serving all these other gods as well. And then it says, the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of the Philistines and into the hands of the sons of Ammon. They keep failing. The angel of the Lord burned. What does it mean to burn? It means to be furious, to be angry. There's no more forbearance, no more long suffering. It kind of reminded me of like the Israelites in the desert when we read in Numbers where it says, God says, you have put me to the test 10 times and have not listened to my voice. And he says, by no means shall you see the land which I promised your forefathers. Like God was done. And God is a forbearing God. But he tested them too much. And he sold them. And to sell them means to give them over. Romans tells us about that even today, how when we persist and persist and persist and are intentional in disobeying God, he says, I'm going to give you over to your lusts. I'm going to give you over to your hearts. I'm going to give you over to your impurity. Why? Because we exchanged the truth of God for a lie. Lies are a powerful thing. It's one of Satan's biggest tools, by the way. That's what I experience when I work with people over and over and over and over. They're believing lies about themselves, about others, about the world in which they live, and about the God that they serve. And we make statements that encompass all of life, and it's like consistent. Like, I never. I can't. I always. She continually. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie. Auditoriums are filled with people searching for truth. Pilate asked Jesus, what is truth? What is truth? And we're not going to go down that path. But it's one worth searching out. God tells the sons of Israel, Judges 10:14, if things are going so well for you, I like how he says this, okay, then things are going so well for you, why don't you cry out to the gods which you have chosen? Let them deliver you at the time of your distress. Like this, let me know how this works out for you. Like sometimes we do that with our kids, right? Or whatever, like, well, I think, and it's better to, okay. Well, you just go down that path, and then you let me know how that works out for you. Sometimes you got to release them. Let them go. So they can come back, hopefully. The truth is, God is patient and long-suffering, yet his patience has reached its end here. Exodus talks about that the Lord is compassionate, he's gracious, he's slow to anger, abounding in loving kindness and truth, who keeps loving kindness for thousands, who forgives iniquity, transgression, and sin. And then we have that yet word. Yet, he will by no means leave the guilty unpunished. God is a just God also. He is incredibly compassionate and long-suffering. But he is a just God. Justice will be served. Well, the sons of Israel said to the Lord, verse 15, we have sinned. Do to us whatever seems good to you, Lord. Only please deliver us this day. It was a corporate confession. I thought that was a key point when I looked at it because it was everybody getting together, making a corporate confession verbally. And there's a lot of studies that show how verbalizing something helps one to be motivated to action. There's something about it where if you can say it, Mr. Rogers used to say it. Some of you don't know who he was, but he had a show on, and I loved his saying. I wrote it on there. If you can mention it, you can manage it. That's what he used to tell. He had a little show, Welcome to My Neighborhood. And I always thought he was kind of corny, but we loved it. He was a neat man. Loved the Lord. He was a pastor, Presbyterian preacher. If you can mention it, you can manage it. Verbalizing it is powerful. Well, they had a corporate confession. And they said, what's next, Lord? They didn't ask the question as to why they were going through the suffering that they were going. They said, what's next? If you read earlier, it says, because you've exchanged my truth for a lie. They knew it. They said, we have sinned. So, they put their foreign gods away, verse 16 says, from among them and served the Lord. And the verse is wonderful. Here's God's compassion. And he could bear the misery of Israel no longer. When they repented and confessed their sin, they said, he could bear their misery no longer. He looked upon them. When we cry out to God in those moments, and when we come to God and not ask the question why, but what's next, God shows compassion. He's a God that loves us and such. Because oppression, suffering, difficulty are always intended to bring us back into relationship with God. It's not to punish us for the wrong that we've done. It's to bring us back home to him, to be in relationship. And it doesn't matter if it was done through omission or commission. I thought, I wonder, see what you think of this. Is that possibly what's going on in our world today? Is it possible that God is waiting for a corporate confession for us to cry out to him? Brokenness always moves the heart of God. Always. Isaiah 61, Luke 4. Always. Brokenness. Well, the sons of Israel may not be real smart, which is the people of Israel, but they're not that dumb. They've been at this game long enough to start to see their cycle. And they cry out to God, and I love how they say, who is the man? Who's the man who will begin to fight against the sons of Ammon for us? Who's the man? I know you got one, God. And here's where we meet our next unlikely choice. It's as if God looked around and said, who's the least likely person that I can find to deliver my people? Judges 11, 1 through 2, 1 and 2. Now Jephthah, the Gileadite, was a valiant warrior, but he was the son of a harlot. Gilead was the father of Jephthah, and Gilead's wife bore him sons. And when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, you shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman. So Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob. And worthless fellows gathered themselves about Jephthah, and they went out with him. So we got Jephthah, who's not part of his brothers. He's not a full-blooded brother. So they drove him out. They said, get out of here. And so he goes ahead, and he gets himself a gang of worthless fellows. Worthless. They're empty and they're reckless men, willing to do about anything. Good crowd, just who you want your kid hanging around. Jephthah was an unknown, fatherless boy who started a gang with a mother who has a questionable lifestyle, but he's a good fighter because, you know, sometimes survival is a tough teacher, right? You gotta be a fighter, otherwise you're not gonna make it in that kind of circle. A very unlikely one to become the next judge. What credentials did this guy have? But no. You go on, 11:5, when the sons of Ammon fought against Israel, like they went to battle, okay? The Ammonites came and they went against Israel, and the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. Like, okay, this isn't going so well, and we got a brother who's a pretty scrappy guy, and he's pretty tough, and maybe we can go back, and he'll come back and help us. Oh, now he's welcome when he's needed. You've probably never had that, have you? I questioned about sharing this, but I thought, yeah, it's okay. I love to give. I love to give. When I find that it's difficult for me is when I feel taken advantage of. And that's just a personal thing, and it's a hurdle I have to jump. But when I feel like I'm being taken advantage of, I have a hard time having a soft heart towards that. Well, like, Lord, it's, I know it's none of my business. And if he says give, I give. But if I feel like someone's just milking it, I have a hard time. So I share that. Well, that's like with Jephthah. It's like, now you don't want me, but now you want me. Oh, yeah, okay. I can maybe help you out a little bit. Well, and here's where I got my first lesson from him, which was forgiveness. Because he says in Judges 11:11, then Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead. He went with him. He forgave him. He didn't have to go with him. It wasn't his fight. It wasn't his battle. He's having a good time hanging out in Tob with his bunch of gangsters, and I don't know what they're up to. He made a little deal with them. Okay, I'll come, but you make me head. And they did. But he forgave those who hurt him. It's a pretty big deal. You see, true forgiveness is a very hard thing. I've worked it a lot. I have spoken with many that say, oh, yeah, I've forgiven. I surely have forgiven them. You bet I have. But they're still bitter. That's not forgiveness. If you still wish someone seasickness and lockjaw at the same time, you haven't forgiven them. Oh, I've forgiven them. Yes, I have. I've forgiven them. But if something bad were to happen to them, it wouldn't hurt you so much. You think, well, there you go, Lord. Just right. Good job. You're bringing justice. About time. Where you been? That's the truth of our hearts, isn't it? True forgiveness. So I thought, Randy, is there someone that you need to forgive? So I ask you, maybe that's a question out of this first lesson. Lord, is there someone that I need to truly forgive. That's part of the testimony that we just professed when we take the Lord's Supper. It's that we have a clean heart towards others. That's a big part of it. Well, Jephthah goes back to Mizpah and makes a commitment before God. That's where we get our second lesson. He offers God his life. And he spoke all these words before the Lord at Mizpah, out loud, confessed it out loud. When was the last time I said to the Lord, I want to do something with my life for your glory, Jesus, not for myself, but for you? Benefits me nothing. Lord, I want to do it for you. What is it that you would have me to do where I get no benefit, no glory? Judges 11:12. Now Jephthah sent messengers to the king, the sons of Ammon, saying, what is between you and me that you have come to fight against my land? This is kind of a big deal. Third lesson. And it showed quite a bit about Jephthah, actually. Because he's taken the step to settle this dispute, to settle this argument and this disagreement between others before he goes to war. Jephthah makes the most diplomatic plea for peace to the kings of Ammon. 11:12, verses 12 through 27. It was a skillful appeal, even though they discarded his message. Matthew tells us, 5:43-47, be subject to Christ, pray for your enemies. Solomon says, it is wise to be kind to your enemies. It's wise. There's a saying that says, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. I don't know if I like that or if I even agree with it. But I think here's the point of it. Is there anyone in my life that I need to take the path of listening, understanding, and reconciliation with? Have I done everything in my power to make peace with this individual or these individuals? Lesson number 3, be a diplomat before you become a warrior. Before you're going to go to battle, try being a diplomat. Fourth lesson, look beyond yourself. Jephthah had the ability to see the situations of today in the context of God's bigger story. One of my tasks and one of my jobs is when I take Scripture and I look at it, and even going through like 3 chapters or whatnot, is go backward and go forward and find out the consistency in the Scriptures to make sure that this is in the right context, with the right message, with the right application. Because we can pull a lot of things out of context and make application that would lead us down the wrong road. Jephthah saw the big picture. He knew the big picture, that God was behind this. He says, he asks them a question. He says, hey, since now the Lord, the God of Israel, drove out the Amorites from before his people Israel, are you then to possess it? It's like, what do you mean God drove them out? They're still in there. This issue of who the Lord wanted in the land was settled a long time ago with Moses. We covered it back in Numbers. And it talked about how Moses took all these cities, Numbers 21-25, and Israel lived in all the cities of the Amorites and Heshbon and all their villages. They lived that land. God had given them that land, and Jephthah's trying to remind them of that. He says he gave it to them. He gave the land into them, and they defeated them, and so they possessed all of it and lived in it. And then Jephthah asked them, he says, don't you possess the land that your God gave you? Shamash? So whatever the Lord our God gives us or has driven out before us, it's ours. We'll possess it. Like if the Lord has given us, this is ours, so we're going to move in. And I'm just trying to give you the opportunity to move out so that we can fulfill that, because that's been a done deal. It's not in question. Do you really want to go to war over this? Choose your battles. Choose them wisely, right? In life, he tries to refresh their memory. After he pleaded his case, doing all he could do, he followed through with what he said. He says, you're making war against me. I'm not making war against you. Get it right. And he says, let the Lord be the judge. That was an interesting statement. He says, we'll see how this shakes out. Let the Lord be the judge. Now the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, so he went on to the sons of Ammon. Lesson number 5, Jephthah's big mistake, Judges 11:30-31. It says, Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you indeed give the sons of Ammon into my hand, then it shall be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the sons of Ammon, it shall be the Lord's, and or I will lift it up as a burnt offering. Lesson 5, final lesson. Don't make rash vows. Big deal. Jephthah went to battle. 20 cities. What's really interesting about that is we don't have one account of those battles, of those 20 battles. Not one thing said about them. Just that there was 20. He took over 20 cities. We didn't hear about any walls falling down like Jericho. We didn't hear about any hail coming from the sky, killing, 135,000 people, or any confusion in the troops, which is 135,000. He just returns home victorious. 11:34 says, when Jephthah came to his house at Mizpah, behold, his daughter was coming out to meet him with tambourines and with dancing. And for the life of me, I can't cognitively understand why he made that vow. What did he think was going to come out his door of his house? He had a wife and a daughter. That's it. Maybe a servant. Unless he had a cow hidden in there or something. What did he think was going to come out that door? God warns us about making rash vows. Ecclesiastes 5:2-8, do not be hasty in word or impulsive in thought to bring up a matter in the presence of God. Be careful to bring things up to God. Don't be rash, empty words. The truth of it is, Jephthah wanted this victory so bad, he was willing to offer anything. And I know that sounds crazy, but as I reflect on that, it was just surprising to me what people will give up for victory and for power and for pleasure and for money. It's incredible what people will give up, what price they will put on their character. I've seen the extremes and absolutely been flabbergasted of what the lengths people will go but to get what they want. It's just so sad. It puts a price on one's character. Does negotiating with God win his favor? It's like when you make deals with God, does it win his favor? Somehow putting a price tag on God's grace and favor cheapens it. It's like by Jephthah saying, whatever comes out that door, I will sacrifice to you, Lord, if you give me the... And not that God always doesn't show compassion and forbearance in those situations. We saw it with Gideon, with his fleeces and all that. But you know what the truth of it is? When we make deals, it's a way of gaining control so we can avoid the pain. That's what deals are. So like we can gain control of the situation. Oh, now I know. Now I know this is the way I'm supposed to go. Or now I know what the Lord wants me to do. It can be risky. And not that it hasn't happened. Jephthah wanted victory so bad, he was willing to offer up anything. And then we get to the real hero of the story. This is incredible. His daughter. She was an unlikely She comes out to congratulate her dad. She's coming out and with tambourines, and she's coming out to tell him just, congratulations, fantastic. 11:35, when he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, alas, my daughter, you have brought me low. And you are among those who trouble me, for I've given my word to the Lord, and I cannot take it back. And I'm not going to go into that, but there's a couple different ways that he could have handled that. But a vow was a vow, and it was pretty serious business. And so he says, I can't take it back. And here is the crux of it. She said, the hero of the story says to him, my father, you have given your word to the Lord. Do to me as you have said, since the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the sons of Abraham. God did what you asked him to do. Now you do what you said you're going to do. Follow through. But she says, could please you just grant me one thing? Can I go and can I leave me alone for a couple months so that I can go up to the mountains with a bunch of friends and just cry my eyes out because I'm never going to be able to get married? My interpretation. She didn't argue with him. She didn't complain to him. She didn't try to change his mind. She didn't leave the house like, you're nuts, I'm out of here. I'm not so sure I would have been so accepting. It's kind of interesting, though, because she did respond the same way he responded to his brothers earlier. Said, you made a reckless decision. Jephthah's brothers made a reckless decision. Said, get out of here, you're not our brother. I'll give you, Lord, whatever comes out the front door when I get back. But I forgive you. He said, I release you. I offer my life for your mistake. That's a pretty big deal. She was willing to pay the emotional pain and consequences from her father's decision. That's true forgiveness. I don't know about you, but I've run into a lot of people that have suffered the consequences of someone else's rash decision. True forgiveness is accepting the pain and the consequences of someone else's thoughtless decision or action. That's true forgiveness. Forgiveness offers freedom from any payment or justice on your behalf for what happened to you or didn't happen for you because of them. You release them. Maybe you're the next unlikely. This Pat Skisbell was an unlikely choice when he kept asking God, why, Jesus, would you make a way for me to be saved? Really what he was asking is, why would you go and die on this cross for me? I'm just not that good. Why would you do that? Why would you offer up the rest of your life and never marry because of some rash words that your dad said? He shared that the only response that he continued to God as he got from God as he searched out that question was this thought that kept coming back of what? The magnitude, the enormity, the cost of what Jephthah's daughter was willing to pay because of her rash words, the cost of what Christ was willing to pay for us. The what? And that's what we remembered earlier in communion. And that was this overwhelming response in Pat's heart. This response to the what. And all he could do was come to Jesus, thank you. Which is a song we sang just before I started the message. Jesus, thank you for the what? And I'm not going to ask why. But I'm not going to understand it. He was an unlikely person to write a song. He wasn't a songwriter. He doesn't have a bunch of songs yet. God chose him for such a time as that. What does it take to be an unlikely? Make it a priority in your life to glorify God. You are his representation here on this earth. Why? So that others may see that it's not a vain thing to trust in him. Live a life that proves God is real, trustworthy, and answers prayer. Be willing to go where God says go and do what God says do. That's how you become an unlikely. It's complete surrender, which often leads to incredible and unexpected places in your life, and just wonderful joys that you never saw coming. And God uses ordinary people for extraordinary things over and over and over. We've seen it, and it's going to continue on as we move into Samson next week. And he used the weak and the broken and the doubting and people's hardships and their trials and their failures. And that is just, he takes our messes, which become our messages, and they become messages of hope for others because they, it's like, yeah, they're not perfect. And not that I need to see all things, but it just encourages me when we gather and we communicate with each other and share, as people did with Kat, about what's going on in their lives. So it's like we can lift each other up and realize that we all have issues that we're working through, and it's like we can come alongside each other and use each other as support. He takes our everyday obedience and shows us his spectacular power. That's the God, the Jesus we serve. Are you willing? Are you ready to be an unlikely? Amen. Dear Jesus, what an unlikely act that you would be willing to do for a people that absolutely set you aside, just like Jephthah's brothers saying, get out of here. We don't want you around. In your case, it was because you were too bright. You were too much of a shining light, of a brightness in a dark world. And we couldn't take it because we are blinded to the lies of what was about us. But dear God, what a message. What a hope. What an act of your defining love. And I pray that we continue in this day and this week and ever until you return to take us home with you again to proclaim this goodness and be an unlikely. Amen.